distinguished authorities, praiseworthy organizers, precious translators, ladies and gentlemen, I feel very honored to be invited to this great, meaningful, particular, challenging conference, where we are urged not to simply celebrate the great commander, the great founder of the Republic of Turkey, but to rethink, discuss, meditate upon his vision. However, first of all, Türkiye Cumhuriyeti kutlu olsun, Türkiye Cumhuriyeti'nin 100. yıl dönümü kutlu olsun. First of all. So you could test the level of my Turkish, and you can understand why I prefer speaking in English. Once again, I experienced the warm hospitality of my second country. And I want now to recall that in my first large essay concerning Kemalist Turkey, published in 1991, I devoted half of this work to the economic policies of the Turkish Republic of Atatürk, and really I stressed the balanced, the pragmatic policies that were unfolded, and the way how Turkey could resist to the storm of the Great Depression. Actually, the distinguished authorities who have delivered the speech before me have dwelled on some points, so I will change something of my speech, not to repeat too many things. Apart from economy, what is Atatürk's legacy today? The core point of this important particular conference, what of Atatürk's set of ideals and beliefs go beyond his times and are a good compass for us in these troubled present times. Really, we are sons and daughters of our age, more than sons and daughters of our parents. Mustafa Kemal was a son of his age. He was a fervent positivist. He shared the opinions of any progressive middle-class man in Western Europe. Really, rethinking Atatürk is a perfect opportunity for rethinking the successes, the achievements, and also the problems, the failures of Western civilization. The great historian, Professor Zafer Toprak, alas, recently passed away, brilliantly argued that Atatürk's Republic of Turkey was the third Republic of France, the third French Republic carried to Anatolia. So there was a common atmosphere stretching from Lisbon to Constantinople. The up-to-date elites of the other countries generally shared the views, the aims, and the ideals of the Western elites and of the Western men of the street. But under the surface of this common sentiment, a great divide could be noticed. Both the Western elites and the Western man of the street thought that the West deserved to have a leading role. The ruling classes thought that the West had the right to rule the rest of the world. The socialists did not. However, they thought that an ideology shaped in the West was the key for the redemption of the whole world. A really key, rooted in the tradition of Western philosophy. So even the socialists, albeit criticized capitalism, imperialists, shared a deeply Western attitude. But outside the West, many thinkers and politically committed people thought that the adoption of Western civilization should not have meant annihilation of the different cultures. Thus, Atatürk firmly believed that in the world many cultures and one civilization existed. Indeed, he never used the plural form for the word civilization. And undoubtedly the features, the size of this civilization prompted by the great leader were the features of the up-to-date Western civilization of his time. But he did not think that the West had the right to rule the rest of the world. This is the greatest difference, an important difference. Quite the opposite. He thought that the rest of the world had to free itself from the rule of the Western powers, like Turkey had. He thought that all the nations had equal rank, so he was a nationalist in the best way, inasmuch he strongly loved his own nation, his home country, defended its individuality, but did not aim at ruling or imposing his views to other peoples outside the boundaries of the new state he had created. Now, looking at the present times, an observer could argue that situation has completely changed compared to Atatürk's times. In the world, there is one culture as comprehensive, coherent, practical, and alive culture. The other cultures are little more than folklore. People can wear their own traditional local clothes, but have got their GSM, watch TV, from TV and social media, are scouted in one model of life and so on. If they still have not got these tools and devices yet, generally long for having them. People who are really detached from the practical everyday life global culture are very few. This culture can be gently defined global, but as a matter of fact is the enjoyed or desired or dreamt Western way of life with the tools and devices of the modern technology. Thus, the world is anthropologically much less plural than 1 century ago. In this first century of the Republic of Turkey, the world has been westernized much more than in the former one, when the Western powers directly or indirectly ruled nearly the whole world, nearly all the planet. At the same time, both the elites of many important countries outside the West and many individuals inside the Western countries consciously reject Western civilization, refuse to be part of Western civilization, consider it evil, corrupt, void. In other words, now we are experiencing a single global culture and mostly as a reaction, a revival of peculiar identities at individual level and a latent clash of civilizations at international level. In this situation, at least two big paradoxes can be observed. The first one is that for billions of human beings outside the West still is the area of freedom, while at the same time in the West, individual freedoms are at stake in such a new way that many people fail to understand. Many people outside the West experience and suffer the old traditional forms of authoritarian rule. For example, let's think about Afghanistani women, an example. The Western people apparently are freer than ever, but they are no longer citizens. They are subjects, because their political power has been transferred to supranational institutions. The second paradox is that the West still thinks to have the right to dictate to the rest of the world what is right, what is wrong. At the same time, the West seems ashamed of its own history, is affected by a strange self-denial. The absurdities of the politically correct and the so-called cancel culture show a neurotic, perhaps psychotic relationship of the West with itself. The West is like a man. Now, the West is like a man screaming night and day to the people around him, "Forgive me for my past misdeeds and be like me," at the same time. And why the globalist elites encourage such a mentality? Because they dislike not the evil but the good of the Western civilization. Quite the opposite, Atatürk challenged Western imperialism, defeated Western imperialism, but loved the good of Western cultures and civilization. In this context, it's urgent and useful to shape an up-to-date Kemalism. The basic values of Kemalism deserve to be defended. Obviously, devoid of the rhetoric of the fight of the brightness against darkness. This is no longer a convincing rhetoric, neither in Turkey nor in the rest of the world. Because now in the West there are elites who reproach the majority of population, arguing that the majority of population is not enlightened, is racist, and so on, for example. Such a rhetoric is a tool of consolation or self-reassurance, but it is not convincing and up-to-date. What is up-to-date, for example, is Atatürk's firm belief that the various nations must keep and care their own individuality, their independence, and especially their economic independence. About this topic, the distinguished former speakers have spent very important and praiseworthy words. So now let me add that this topic is a topic I am particularly sensitive about as an Italian historian. You know, during the War of Independence, especially in the years 1919, 1921, the Italian policymakers aimed at establishing an economic monopoly in the southwestern Anatolia. On the basis of hundreds of documents, and not with the purpose of flattering this distinguished audience, I can assure that the Italian policymakers really from the very beginning did not share the aggressive policy prompted by the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George. From the very beginning, Italy disliked, did not share such an attitude. In the first months, this was French attitude as well. Then the French slowly changed their Turkish policy. Lloyd George went on with the Turkish policy leading to the Sèvres peace treaty. I can assure that really Italian governments and the vast majority of Italian public opinion did not share such an attitude. And they supported the nationalist forces, for example, Turkish guerrilla in southern western Anatolia. The Italian areas of occupation were very comfortable hubs for Demirci Mehmet Efe and other important guerrilla leaders. And they provided weapons and munitions to the national forces, and they supported the territorial claims of the nationalist movement. However, the Italians had a colonialist attitude. They pursued a light, soft colonialism. Well, Mustafa Kemal and his comrades repeatedly warned their Italian interlocutors that they would not accept either a heavy or a soft loss of sovereignty. But the Italian ministers, diplomats, agents, authorities generally preferred thinking that one day the Turkish nationalists would change attitude. Actually, among them, one did. In March 1921, the delegate of the Ankara government at the London conference, Bekir Sami, later Bekir Sami Kunduh, signed two agreements with the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Briand, and with the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sforza. On the basis of these two agreements, areas of economic hegemony were granted to France and Italy. But in Ankara, these two agreements were firmly repudiated, and Bekir Sami no longer was appointed for relevant duties. In other words, the leaders of the national movement were absolutely serious and sincere in their defense of economic independence. And we know that at Lausanne, in the Lausanne conference, the harshest debates, the harshest negotiations were about the economic terms of the peace, the economic sides of the peace. And this is a great lesson today, because now in the areas still dominated by the Western elites, a dramatic process of concentration of wealth and power is in progress. The national parliaments and governments have lost de facto, filen, or de jure, canunen, almost the totality of their prerogatives. We could argue that national sovereignty in the West is over. National sovereignty for the great leader, for the great founder, was quite important, and it is still very important, because this loss of national sovereignty has not led to a brotherly union of nations, but to the total domain of selected circles who are not submitted to whatever democratic scrutiny. And this is a dramatic problem. In the 20th century, Atatürk was the great model of the nationalist and progressive leaders of the so-called Third World. You know better than me that personalities like Che Guevara, like Nehru, like Bourguiba strongly admired Atatürk. Atatürk was the great model for the fight against Western imperialism. In the 21st century, Atatürk could be the perfect model for audacious Western statesmen in their fight for the liberation of the Western peoples from their own elites. Western Europe, indeed, is now in a situation quite similar to the situation of the Ottoman Empire in 1881, when its finances were formally submitted to foreign rule, and to the situation of the Ottoman Empire in 1920, when its legitimate government signed the peace treaty of Sèvres. We know that in Turkey, Atatürk's famous call to the Turkish youth is hanged to the walls of all the schools and public offices. And I'm starting suspecting that it is time to hang this famous call to the walls of all the schools and public offices of Western Europe. So to come to the conclusion of my speech, another important and still very useful side of Atatürk's legacy is ethic. The balance between individual freedom, a commitment to the community. Also, in this field, we can admire Atatürk's balanced, pragmatic, and open-minded vision. He wanted people to be psychologically free. He wanted, especially women, to be free. But I don't think that he would have looked favorably at widespread consumism and lavishness. He thought that freedom is strictly linked to a deep commitment toward community. He did not conceive freedom as individualistic egoism and egotism. He shared the idea of society as an organism, not as the mathematical addition of individuals. Now, some circles in the West promote absolute individualism. They want the Western man to be and feel totally free. And I suppose nobody is against freedom here. But the problem is that the old values are belittled and even ridiculized. The Western woman and the Western man can do whatever they can do if they have got enough money to do it. For example, buying children. They are completely free and alone. They are increasingly deprived of welfare and social protection. They are encouraged to be the God of themselves without an external measure for the evaluation of their behavior. This is completely against Atatürk's vision. It was an austere, serious vision of life, of the meaning of life. And indeed, the old bourgeoisie was not like this. The late 19th century bourgeoisie was not like this, and Atatürk was not educated like this. It preached austerity and disliked the lavishness of aristocracy. Yes, there was plenty of hypocrisy in the moralism of the old middle class. I am a historian, like other speakers are, and we historians know that we never must mythologize the past. The past is beautiful because it's past. Yet, we must inquire, we must think about if the absence of an ideological pattern pushing the individuals to self-control and responsibility is sustainable for a society. If the mere sum of a lot of the individuals can be called a society. Atatürk prompted a strong sense of belonging to superior community, a sense of belonging fed, for example, with festival days aimed at celebrating the most important steps of the War of Independence, of the Turkish Revolution, from the landing to Samsun to the proclamation of the Republic. These festival days obviously are remembrance of the past, but some of them bring beautiful names that appeal to the young generations, to youth. You know better than me, 23 April Day is the feast of national sovereignty and of the children. It is so sweet. And 19 May is the day of the remembrance of Atatürk, of youth and sport. And 24 November is the day of the teacher. You can understand that I particularly love this day. So to come back to the second mentioned paradox of current Western culture, Atatürk still teaches us the importance of national pride. Sure, national pride is wrong and dangerous when associated to militarism and to aggressive policies. But this was not the spirit of Atatürk's idea of national pride. The perfect representation of the idea of national pride is the speech he delivered in occasion of the 10th anniversary of the Republic. It is really one of the most beautiful, of the noblest speeches in the history of 20th century, and maybe of all history, because it is the speech of a great, successful military leader. He could dwell long minutes about his own victories, on military victories. Yet, he did not connect national pride to the past military victories, but to civil and ethical values like work, science, and arts. And I praise to İşbankası for its strong and praiseworthy support to cultural activities. This is one of the most beautiful sides of the great economic holdings and institutions in Turkey. They keep this strong, deep, warm, pedagogical vision of the great leader. Memory and progress, self-respect, respect of the others. In this way, a society can correctly develop. And also, for this matter, Atatürk's pedagogical vision is still a great lesson for all of us. Thank you.